Okay, everyone. I want to thank everyone for taking a moment to look at this, and I thought you could use it. This is HOMER energy, and this was actually, I used this in my thesis, and it allowed me to do a lot of very cool things. Alright, what you're staring at now is basically the interface screens, which you get when you first start up. And these are selections, loads, generators, batteries, flywheel, what have you. And it will actually start a little something like this, which is bare bones. And then if you want to add a load and say some PV and generator and let's say a battery while we're at it, you do so. And you're like, well, that's cool, but it doesn't help me as much. You know, it's kind of neat, but let me see more. I'm glad you asked. So I have more. Now, I'm running on the last 1 or 0 days of my license, which is about 100 bones for 6 months. So I can't show you guys a whole bunch. I'll show what I can. And if anyone has any questions, let me know, and I might have some other video that I can put up. But let's go ahead and go to core. Now what I did is I went ahead in my thesis, I went to Biosphere, and Biosphere is a little bit north of Tucson, and this is the village of Biosphere. And each one of these are casitas, and they essentially function as their own individual houses. And I had energy readings for 17 months, and I used 12 for 2011 year. And doing so, I was able to create this, and this is going to be one of your loads. This is my primary load. Now the bad part is my energy readings were in months. HOMER accepts things in a week, so I had to do some math translation. Now it also allows you to add randomability. Like if you don't have real data or you want to make the data a little bit more real, you can add day to day. You can also add time to time. I added some variation in there that I thought was reasonable. And this is your density map, as well as just another way to look at it. And it'd be AC or DC. And then over here you've got, you know, max, minimum, and mean. And it also gives you what I found useful, something that is my average kilowatt hour per day that the facility used. And so throughout the year, of course, I had higher peaks and valleys. But the nice thing is that gave me an area where I could start working on putting my renewable in place. So what I added is I added another load, and I call this my DC electric quick charger. Or I'm sorry, my electric vehicle DC quick charger, as you see there. In this case, it is currently AC, later it will be DC, and I did that for a reason. And I decided that I need to have, there are 27 units I was using. I assumed 2 cars per unit and 10% population for EVs. So 5.4, which basically works out at 10%. And right here, I worked out 10% EV population, 5.4, 135 kilowatt hours a day. Assuming they're charging once every 2 days with a 100-mile range. I won't get into all that, but basically 15% and then 20%, and then this was 25. But realistically, for my model, I concentrated on 10%. You also have the ability to link if you want to make sure that this is affected by certain items. You can. Another thing is you can get plots out of it, and you get hourly plots, you know, monthly, density map. Here's profile. Now, as you can see, I added the variation of day-to-day 40% and hourly 20%, and so this is still 135 hours. I'm sorry, 135 kilowatt hours, but the shape's different, and this makes it look a little more realistic. Kind of useful. My cat Momo is bugging us. Hi, Momo. All right, so when you look at this, and you know there's nothing here because you're not going to be able to see anything here, but that was optimized results, and you can add constraints. For my real model, I wanted a 45% renewable fraction, which means that of all the power consumed by the facility, it has to be for 45%. This is my core, so that wasn't possible, so I set to 0. These are called sensitivities. And so what you see is my operating cost is $40K per year. My net present cost, which is the lifetime of a 25-year study, about $636, and my cost of energy is about 16.7 cents per kilowatt hour. My net purchase from the grid is 240 megawatt hours per year. And you can see some stuff here. This, of course, is not as interesting because, well, we don't have anything yet. So let's take it a little farther. Let's add just some solar. And turn this back to set. So when you add solar, you're suddenly able to add more things. Now, the way I have it set up is I have it set up so that there's solar on each roof, broken up into 4.6 kilowatts. And decentralized solar, rooftop mounted solar does not take any, technically doesn't take any land space. So I'm not absorbing a large field somewhere. You set the cost through here and you add replacement. Of course, I said 600 because I assumed if there's a failure, it wasn't going to be the whole lot of it. It was just going to be a portion. And since it's modular, 600 seemed fair. It's about, a kilowatt's going to run you about 2,700 to put in just raw. I'm not counting the inverter there or some of the other balance of the system. But for this purpose, it works. And then I had some other levels I was working with. You'll notice I've got 155, 180, and 200 here. I actually ended up with 125 as my selection, but I put all this in through here, and I've literally spent hundreds of hours running through all this. Now, on this one, I put in sensitivities for the efficiency. We've got a standard one at 14, maybe we're using 6, so they're at 12, and then we've got another one that, you know, maybe it's monocrystalline solar, so it's 18, right? Or some new version you came up with. And your angles and all that are handled here. And of course, this is a DC output. Now, the inverter, I was doing a study, so in my purpose, I was using 6 inverters in parallel for an entirely different reason. But the way HOMER works is that you can have as many as you want here, but like the refuse sol, it was the inverter I was modeling after, and theirs was 24 kilowatts for about 30,000. And so I've got 6 of these guys, and of course my price is significantly higher, but for what I was doing, this is what works, and you're allowed to set the efficiencies as well as in rectifier and lifetime mode. I now am using the grid as part of a power source as well. It's part of my 45 renewable fraction minimal, and what I liked here is you're able to set, because utilities charge different rates at different times, I was able to go ahead and I took this from a utility, and I was able to set demand charges and rate times depending on peak times. And really, it's all you do is you just grab and you drag down, and if you're doing weekdays, you drag down. Weekends only, you drag down depending on which one you're using. Really nice. Also, you can adjust the emissions, and you can set the target maximums per year. These, of course, are sensitivities. I'm going to get to, and of course per day as well, and you've got other prohibitories. It's pretty deep stuff. So when I look at this grid, I see that, the way it's set up now is I've got my charge down here. So my EV charger is at 0, 10%, 20%, or sorry, 10%, 15%, and 20%. And then over here is the differences in the quality of my efficiency of my PV. And, over here, you can go ahead and you can superimpose certain things. Like I can put capacities, I can put, levelized costs, I can see how much things run, net present costs. And when you start adding a charger, things change a little bit, but if you didn't have the solar to balance things out, you'd run into problems. And so anyways, you get this whole list of things you can look at. You can look at CO2 emissions. Now in a prior version I was looking at, my emissions for 10% were roughly, for 10% EV population, roughly about 150 tons per year. And here we're looking at much lower. And so you can see just by adding this, you make a cleaner. Mama, I'm feeding you later. So, anyways, 1 second, guys. Sorry about that. I had to take care of Momo. Alright, anyways, now you can go ahead and look at these individually. And so you can set ratings. And this is kind of nice if you're looking at different sensitivities or different levels. And so when I look at this, and we'll say 14%, and the maximum yearly kilowatt hour purchase of 120,000 or 120 megawatts. I now can start looking at things. I can look at cost summary, which we all know are very important, electrical, PV, which is kind of nice. You can see how the outputs roll out. My grid purchase for year is 38 instead of 240, which is 38 megawatt hours instead of 240. My emissions, instead of being 152, are in the 24 range. So you can go ahead and you can look at these plots too. You can pull this up and you can right click and change the properties. If you want to amplify, like you're going to cut and paste, and you really want these to show up nicely, and then you right click and you can save as PNG or copy bitmap, and you can add multiple stuff, and you've got very useful, very useful. And this was just for solar. If I go down to here, things start looking a little different. But you're like, okay, well, that's nice. That seems pretty useful. It's pretty deep. Now, let's go ahead and look at something a little bit more complex, because right here I only had 4 simulations and 105 sensitivities, and so it only took 4 seconds to run. Now let's go into my monster. I didn't get to this evolution overnight. It took a lot of just building it. It got really small in the beginning, then it got very big, and then after I knew what I was looking at, it got a lot smaller. And so what you see here is you see that I've invoked a lot of batteries. And like this one is 8.75 kilowatts, 12.5 kilowatts, 25 kilowatt hours, and then 50 kilowatt hours. The fuel cells, I go all the way from 0 to 125 kilowatt stack. I've involved a fuel cell, which is something, the way HOMER involves a fuel cell is you add an electrolyzer, and of course I've got some variants here. I got this from Proton-onsite, these numbers. Everything on here is either from data recorded or from specs from a commercial off the shelf. And then for the tank, it's in kilograms because 1 kilogram of hydrogen is about equivalent to a gallon of gasoline, more or less. And you come all the way down here, and then you've got your, you can set your fuel schedule. This is fuel cell, but it could very well be diesel, biogas, propane, methanol, natural gas, and the schedules. Because HOMER looks for the cheapest way to run things, and sometimes you don't want the cheap. Sometimes you want a renewable to work, and renewables cost more now, but then again, well, let's be honest, if oil wasn't subsidized up the wazoo, we'd all be using renewables. So anyways, the green represents areas that it's forced in operation, and I was following the scale of that utility rate. But if you're going to change something, you just kind of highlight and drag. Pretty nifty. So you start looking at it this way, and this is a map, and so here you see I've got the electrolyzer and the battery and the fuel cell all working, and then up here, and it'll turn more reddish the more the fuel cell's working. This is a neat answer, but it isn't the only answer, because what will happen is certain things you want to look specifically at will not be available. Oh, just to show the difference, up here I have 37,632 simulations with 35 sensitivities. It took my my gaming rig here 19 hours and 56 minutes and 59 seconds, 59 minutes 59 seconds to run the simulation. It was a bear, and I had not seen all my processors light up so much. And again, okay, over here we had the constraints. I put in different constraints originally. Like I said, it was kind of rough to find my way, but with the simulation was really a lot nicer. Temperature only in Celsius. I had originally pulled off what turned out to be Fahrenheit and didn't catch it, and so a portion of my runs were all in Fahrenheit, and for some reason I need a whole lot more solar, and my other stuff is burning out a lot faster, so beware of that. That's important to know. In this model, like I said, I'm treating these. Now I put the charger on DC side because I did that for a reason. I was trying to isolate things that were in DC to reduce some power loss, etc. Now, when you look at this stuff, you know, right now I've got PV production. You can see these numbers here. But if I was going to go ahead and go through grid purchases or any of this other stuff, you know, you can go through and unmet load. Looks like I'm meeting all my load pretty well. Battery throughput. This is interesting because, and this one's different than the other one because my DC scale's up here. And I realized that 524 for the village was good for the average power usage, but for a normal home, maybe not so much. And of course, a normal home is bigger. So I went ahead and I adapted my model to see if it would work if I applied it to a community of homes. Something like where it's all patio homes and again parking's not allowed, and maybe you want a community charger or you want to run water pumps, what have you. And so I went all the way up to 1,000 watts. And you know, for a moderately efficient home, this isn't so unreasonable. Everywhere in the white, pulling purely from the grid, this stuff isn't working. Or it's just not cost effective. You know, it depends on how you got it set up. So I went ahead and I said, okay, well, let's go ahead and look at this through a surface plot, which I thought this was a cool feature. And here I've got the renewables, so you can see how the renewables bleed in, and then it's, of course, color representative. Over here showing, you know, the renewable fraction penetration. And yellow's higher, red's higher, but as we get along here, we're using a lot more grid, and our renewables drop. Now, I've set a minimal, which forced everything to do what it's supposed to, but let's say I want to look at cost of energy, and I want to see how that, yeah, let's see how that reflects with the battery throughput, or even the let's say the PV production, and or even just the net cost, net present cost. What's interesting is we have kind of a swath in here, and of course my you know, in order to power more, I need a larger array. So we look at the PV array. You know, back here, I'm in the 150. I can go as low as 115, but if I want to run a charger, I need to be 125 and 145 if I want to sit up here. If I, you know, but what you don't see here is because I had more solar available to me, it chose not to use the fuel cell. If I kept it at 125, you would see the fuel cell be a lot more active. But if I allowed the flexibility to go up to 155 to 100, basically up to 185, then this takes on a new shape. And this helps you really pick and decide how you're going to frame your microgrid. Okay, so anyways, you know, I thought that was very beneficial. So then I turned it to here. I said, okay, this is a neat feature. You guys are going to like this. I've got a large swath. All of these things were evolution, so they're not just added out of thin air. I took all these versions, and by the way, it gives you little recommendations down here. You know, it's like, this is wrong, adjust this, etc. Or you can click on this, which gives you a readout of everything you have up here in this circle, and then it gives you what works. You know, the solar here works almost all the way through. And of course, this is case by case, but it tells you what really works. The 21, the 63, the 84 kilowatt fuel cells work really well. The max N battery, which was an 8.75 kilowatt, works really well. Or the max E. And this is actually nice because this was kind of confirmed in other study information that you won't see here, but that I did in my thesis. So it's kind of picking up on things that I said it needed to do. And of course it felt that this was ideal. Now, this gives you a pinpoint to run towards. It doesn't really solve your problem because when you look at this, you're like, okay, this tells me a lot, but it lets you really swoop down and start going for more restrictions. But when we go back to what turned out to be one of my winning versions, you know, I was able to get by with 125 kilowatts, 144 inverter array, and, oh wait, sorry. Let's go to the right one. Oh. There we go. I was able to get what worked out really well. And as you can see, it's more orange because I didn't have the extra PV array because I limited it to 125. So I was able to tap, it said, okay, well in that case I have to use these other items. And so you start seeing, you know, that's converter capacity. But we could easily go with fuel cell production. And you see the power production of the fuel cell here. I could easily, let's go like this. Let's go to surface plot. And let's go with battery throughput. And so you see the battery throughput, you know, of course, as you're asking more of it, it's demanding and going more into it. But the point is, although the other one, you know, if you had unlimited resources, great. But what I was trying to do was an economy system. But I learned how to do it by looking at something like this. So then I went ahead and I looked at what it considered, these are optimization, these are the most cost effective. And you know, when I put it here at 750, like if I'm dealing with a standard home, then I gotta be sitting around 155, 165. But if I'm dealing in the 525, see how you gotta use everything in here. And like let's say, you know, 1,000. 1,000 I can't do unless I take out the charger. So, you know, HOMER is very powerful. You know, and if I go ahead and I bring in, I can even get to 25%, and I require pretty, you know, I require a good fuel cell, I require a big battery. These are very expensive batteries too. And, you know, but look at the net present cost. Let's go ahead and go to 125. Let's say 10% because we're not going to see, I mean, electric cars are coming, but you're not going to go from 0 to 15% electric car population. You'll see 10% first. So when you start looking at net present cost, going, you know, and working here, and then the cost of energy, you know, there's going to be some area. This is all relative, and you'll have to pay attention to it. But you get to see, but the point is I'm showing how HOMER works, not the design. And I can look at things, I can pick up on a lot of very important things. And then when you go ahead and you pick here, you realize that some of these answers are going to be relative to what you're using. This isn't row 1, row 2, row 3. This is just in this column. And then you find out winners. And what I was able to do with this is I'm able to go, okay, I'm going to concentrate on this one, this one, this one. I'm going to concentrate on this one. And then you run this again. And if it's yellow, it means it could be above or below. HOMER is very conservative, and it will always try and get you to mitigate a lot of things. Because it is cheaper to pull from the grid if you count money only. Not cheaper if you count global warming or other sensitivity costs. Like in the location where I'm at, there's tons of water. So it's actually cheaper to produce water for the fuel cell. Even though it costs more, by just making the hydrogen there, I cut out 1.9 tons per year. Not counting, I mean that was counting having the truck come up once a month. And that's not even counting the electric cars, the 30 to 40 tons of CO2 that are removed by their operation. So anyways, I hope everyone likes this. I realize it's a little lengthy, but I want to kind of show, oh, this is an important feature before I go. You'll like this. Let's say that, okay, let's go back to the 525 I was working on, and I go here and I'm like, I click on this and I've got all this information to pull from. You know, batteries, PVs, and when, like, if I'm going to grid, I go here, I'm only pulling 50 megawatts per year, megawatt hours per year. But in my other model that had no renewable support, I was pulling 240 megawatt hours per year. And you're like, well, it's still cheaper. But when I go to emissions, my emissions from the other design was 152 tons of CO2 production per year. Here it is now 31. And I'm still able to charge electric cars. So, I mean, you start looking at this, it starts really letting you decipher what is useful. And it's a very nice layout. Now, it's, you know, it's hard to go ahead and you can go to all this and you can right click and adjust the properties. Like if you're going to cut and paste into a report. That's obnoxious, but you get the point. If you want to see battery throughput. This is why I chose the flow batteries, by the way. The flow batteries can be discharged completely and then brought back from zero regularly because they keep their electrolytes in separate tanks. Only the stack needs to be replaced about every 4 to 5 years. And you have to figure that out for yourself. I went ahead and did the math and figured it out. But you got the inverters, the electrolyzers, hydrogen production, the hydrogen grid, and how the tank does, your emissions, and you're like, this is fantastic, but how am I going to remember all this? You can go and hit HTML reports, and let me pull this over, and now you have a complete readout that's printable or print as a PDF of all your information. Useful. And how the system behaves. You know, I looked at a lot of sophisticated modeling systems before I stuck with HOMER, and I will say, oh yeah, and again, you know, of course you have the plots. You know, these are all pretty useful too. I will say there's a lot of good ones out there, but like I looked at I looked at Paladin, and Paladin is fantastic. It's very much like AutoCAD. However, it's really zoomed in. You know, it's if you're building a plant. But what I was doing is I was building a community. So I needed more of an aerial view to see viability and to prove that my hypothesis has some ump to it and can actually do what it's supposed to do. Over here, in case I can go into this, I chose locations, and I was able to pull in the data for the solar here at the location 5.4. There, make sure you understand your coordinates, because there's a couple of versions of this out here. I flipped out because I grabbed the other coordinates, just double checking at the last moment before my defense, and suddenly my designs weren't working. But it's because I had a different version of the coordinates, so it was actually pointing a different location. Spare yourself a heart attack and avoid that. You know, and again, you know, all of this, you've got baseline, you've got extraterrestrial, there's a lot to pull in from there. But as I was saying, you know, this is a excellent software, and for the price, especially if you are was once but now no longer a grad student, and don't be fooled by the simplicity of the graphics. I mean, I pulled out some pretty hardcore, hard to figure out solutions from this, and I was very pleased about it. And I would recommend, you know, I'd recommend anyone take a look at this, especially if you're a grad student, even if you're in industry. This is used pervasively throughout everywhere. Also, if you look at this and you're like, okay, I want to see what the tabular looks like, not a problem, but often it's used. I mean, not used, but huge. Same thing here. You can go ahead and look at overall, but when you throw it into categories, these are your winners. And these are the ones that are most cost effective. And when you look at it, you know, the price differences, and depending on what you're trying to accomplish, you will determine which one's the winner. Now, what I was shooting for was a 45% minimum, because the idea is that, you know, the old engineering adage, fast, cheap, and good, pick two. I was shooting for a middle ground so that I could make the array affordable and still accomplish my goal. And it turns out that I had a hard time coming down to 45% energy efficiency. You know, even when I went to higher percentages, what happened was, you're like, well, wait, that went back up. Yes, it did, because now it's demanding more of the fuel cell, more of the batteries from when I made a selection. And in fact, if you start hitting into these ranges, and then you look at these maps, it's not going to show it to me there, but you can also do line plots where, like, this is a, you know, levelized cost and the PV array. And so at this point here, you know, at the ratings I set, which is, you know, pretty hefty, you start seeing that I can now start significantly driving down the cost, and how much I drive the cost down. So I hope this helps everyone. I really was pleased with HOMER, and I was really, you know, like I said, I blew it off the first time because I didn't dive into it, and I wish I had. I would have saved my, I would have probably been done, you know, a few months earlier. I think that it's a very deep program, very misleading when you look at it, but It was recommended to me from the guys at NREL, and if you have any questions, let me know. And also the help database. You don't get too much support from HOMER Energy directly. A lot of it is searching the database, but a lot of people ask a lot of questions. Like one that just a quick touch on it. I found that I couldn't get my fuel cells to actually activate. And what someone said is you have to lower your OEM costs to really, and you don't want to do this when you're actually doing your comparing of apples and apples data, but when you're trying to just see what works and doesn't work, sometimes you have to really drop that cost because HOMER has to see it's a better deal to use this or force the operation. Yeah. But anyways, I babbled on enough. This should be enough to let anybody really have a feel for this. And again, if you have any questions, please let me know. You get a 15-day trial with HOMER before they ask for money. So it's extremely reasonable to check it out. And like I said, it's very misleading. And the other thing is you spend hours just figuring out how to do it. So if you're going to tackle something like this, you probably want to get it really, you want to set aside some time. Well, I hope that helps, and it's a great program, and I used it to achieve my master's in alternative energy.